Hi there, welcome back to my YouTube page and welcome to my home office in Jerusalem as well. My name is Daniel Rosal. I'm a freelance writer, ghostwriter, and the founder of DSR Ghostwriting. That's at dsrghostwriting.com, specializing in long form thought leadership content for the technology sector. Current project offering includes articles and blogs, ebooks, speeches, and white papers. So in today's video, I'd like to discuss something that comes up quite a lot when people are thinking about hiring a ghostwriter or they're interested in ghostwriting, learning more about the kind of work that ghostwriters do. And that's the question that's usually framed, well, ghostwriting sounds really interesting, but is it legit? And that's an American word, as other people call it legitimate. So I want to address that. I've already written about that in a blog post. I have written about that in Medium. And I touched upon this a couple of weeks ago when speaking to Brittany in the Career Journey podcast. So if you want to check out that interview, please look at the podcast. If you're interested in getting into freelance writing, ghostwriting as a possible career, then I gave some insights into what you need to do to get started. So is ghostwriting legit? So I have a very easy answer to that. So ghostwriting, for those who are not aware, and if you're watching this video, you probably are, but it's a relationship involving essentially two people. One is the author, and it's always a strange terminology to me because the author is the person who doesn't actually end up writing. Whether we're talking about a book or an article, that's typically the terminology used. So the author could be a celebrity, could be an entertainer, could be a very important CEO, business person, it doesn't matter. The person who has the idea for the book, whatever piece of content or writing we're talking about, would be the author. On the other side of the relationship, we have somebody called the ghostwriter, commonly just abbreviated as the ghost. Now the ghost, typically somebody coming from a writing background. It should go without saying that if you're working full-time as a ghostwriter, you're hopefully at least a proficient writer, if not a good one. And these people basically dedicate all their time to working with a number of clients on ghostwriting projects. Now, as I'll discuss shortly, there are different scenarios in which ghostwriting can be done, different people who will wear the hat of the ghostwriter. For example, it could be a PR firm. PR firms do an awful lot of ghostwriting for corporate clients. It could be a in-house communications team, and perhaps more precisely a PR person on the comms team, or it even could be a secretary, HR manager, office manager in smaller organizations, somebody who's just called upon on a sort of ad hoc basis to do some ghostwriting for perhaps the CEO, CTO if it's a tech startup, etc. So the first thing that I would say about ghostwriting when people ask, is ghostwriting legit, is I would say not only do I think it is legitimate, I think it's actually a really important service in which you pair up two people with different skill sets. So why would somebody typically use the services of a ghostwriter, you might be wondering? Well, the answer depends on a few factors, but a common one would be that the person lacks that writing proficiency I talked about. So the ghostwriter tends to be someone who's good at writing, used to writing, relatively quick at writing. Perhaps it's somebody who's bought something like a dummy's guide to how to write a book in 90 days and they got through 5 pages of drafting and then they realize that maybe this just isn't for them. So they might lack the writing proficiency, they might lack the time and the patience to really invest in the writing process. So when I talk about the value of working with a professional ghostwriter, it actually comes from a few different standpoints. One, as I mentioned, they're a good writer, but just as importantly, and actually more importantly, they tend to be skilled in the art of working with an author to bring out their best ideas to put in the narrative of that book. So, just based on their background, frequently journalistic background, based on their long writing experience with clients, ghostwriters are good at working with clients in order to see the project through its various phases. The first phase typically would be the onboarding phase. So your average author might have perhaps a rev transcript. They might have some notes in a Word document. They might have a few call recordings, sound recordings, a few notes written on the back of napkins in restaurants, and they can send those to you. So it comes from all directions. The ghostwriter is good at compiling sources, identifying perhaps gaps in those sources, and getting together everything needed in order to begin the process. After that, the ghostwriter takes on the role, besides being a writer, something like a Sherpa for the project. So if we're talking about a book project, we'll typically begin with the ghostwriter putting together a chapter by chapter outline for the book, sending that over for feedback to the client, getting their input, the client here being the author in inverted commas, getting their input, and then going ahead and working on the drafting process. Throughout that process, keeping the author updated, and then keeping an eye as well as a sort of copy editor. So in newspapers, copy editors, one of their biggest responsibilities is fact checking. So the ghostwriter, as well as a writer, is keeping one eye on the facts to make sure there's no conflicts in the narratives. Is everything double checked? They're not responsible for legally vetting that the work is free of defamation, at least in cases I'm familiar with. But they might be the first person to catch any potential problems and bring those to the attention of the author. So really, this is ghostwriting is an interesting collaboration between two people, one of whom lacks the writing proficiency, passion for writing, ideas, organizational abilities to bring a work like a book from conception through to publication. And on the other hand, a professional writer who does this repeatedly, who's good at compiling sources, conducting interviews, and interviewing is often a skill that a good ghostwriter can bring to the table. So conducting those interviews to get the information needed. And then finally, there's one last stage of the ghostwriting relationship, which is that if we're talking about books, and typically when we talk about ghostwriting, the traditional paradigm or lens through which ghostwriting has been discussed has been book ghostwriting. But there's these days, ghostwriters tend to work on a lot of different projects. So on a typical day, I might be working on articles and blogs. I could be writing on a book, an actual book. Could be working on an ebook that's never going to be published in hard copy format. Could be working on a speech. I consider it all ghostwriting. Some people would draw the line between books and everything else. Some people would include social media posts. If you're just writing somebody's Facebook and Twitter as ghostwriting. I don't do social media, but anything that doesn't contain, that you're not going to be attributed or bylined, to use the writing jargon, to the ghostwriter, to me is ghostwriting. So the person typically involved in that would have long-standing experience, and they would be basically in a good position to do this. Now, when a project comes to completion, the ghostwriter would also often, if we're talking in the book realm, they would know what to do in terms of advising their client on ways to get that book to market. So whether we're talking about self-publishing, for example, publishing through Amazon, and that's done through a platform called KDP, which stands for Kindle Direct Publishing, or if we're talking about going through a traditional route, approaching a publishing company through perhaps a literary agent or directly, the ghostwriter would be able to point the author in the right direction, saying, this is a good agent for you. These companies might be a good fit. If you're looking to put it on KDP, here's a resource for that. Here is a cover art, graphic artist I've worked with and I can recommend. Here's a typesetting person who I've worked with that I can recommend, etc., etc. So the ghost is more than a writer in many cases, and more of a conduit and a Sherpa and a guide for bringing these great ideas and often amazing life stories actually into print. So from my perspective, that is a legitimate activity, as any business relationship is. And it's also a value add, because for people like you and I who enjoy reading books on paperback or Kindle, whatever format we like, and I'm a huge Kindle fan, we end up with books in our hands that would not, and on our bookshelves, that would not be there if it were not for ghostwriters who are working day in, day out, the hard work of working with authors in order to bring these ideas into concrete reality. So that's my main opinion on why ghostwriting is indeed something good. Second and third points, and I'll just make these quickly. Ghostwriting is really, really something that's done an awful lot in the professional and corporate world. The one form of ghostwriting I would distinguish between is professional versus academic. Academic ghostwriting is where I throw my hands up and say, I don't think that's legitimate. That's writing for people in MBA programs or different graduate programs or even undergraduate programs, and they want somebody to write their dissertation or their term papers. So that's not something I engage in, and that's something that I think a lot of business ghosts would not go near, and that I want to just emphasize that when we're talking about business ghostwriting and academic ghostwriting, we're really talking about two quite different activities typically done by different people. So distinguish between academic and business ghostwriting. So business ghostwriting is done by PR companies, as I said, in-house comms people, various people. It goes on an awful lot. If you're a frequent reader of trade media, particularly B2B trade media, and you're keeping up to date with what other companies are doing and writing, there's a very high likelihood that a lot of that content, in inverted commas, written by CEOs, CTOs at that company has been drafted by a ghost of some sort, whether a freelance ghost or an in-house ghost, as I mentioned. Thirdly, last but not least, if you look at the history of ghostwriting, it goes back quite some time. Now, I wasn't around in the days of ancient Rome, but being a scribe was one of the most common professions. And you can only imagine that the scribes sometimes worked on composing orations and other texts in the ancient world for the patrons they worked with, but certainly in more recent history, so long as blogs have been on the internet and companies have been exploiting the ease of online publication to run inbound marketing, there have been ghostwriters helping out to allow marketing teams to fill up ambitious editorial calendars and content schedules, but giving that extra hand where it might be very difficult from a simple manpower perspective to actually do that. So it's long-standing, it's well practiced, it's frequently practiced, and in my opinion, ghostwriting is there needn't be this big legitimacy question mark hanging over it. I think it's a very legitimate business relationship between two parties that each lack a couple of skills, and therefore it's something I'm happy and actually proud as a reader to engage in and to help create those works that wouldn't get to market through any other means. Hope this video has been interesting, given you perhaps some pause for thought about ghostwriting. Feel free to disagree with what I've written by leaving a comment below. I'll put a link to the website in YouTube, but it's dsrghostwriting.com. And if you are looking to work with a ghostwriter for your book, article, blog, ebook, speech, white paper, please do check out dsrghostwriting.com. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to bringing the next video very soon.